Hello and welcome to the PMC podcast, where PMC stands for Project Management Conversations. I have Elizabeth with me today, who is training and mentoring project managers. She is a fellow of the Association for Project Management and was the youngest female fellow when she was appointed. Uh, Prior to becoming an independent practitioner, she spent over 15 years in the corporate leading projects. She is an author. One of her books, Project Management in Real World, was shortlisted for the Management Book of the Year awards in 2014. She blogs at rebelsguide to pm.com, and I'm delighted that we have her on the podcast today. Thanks for taking the time out, Elizabeth. It would be great if you want to add anything that I might have missed in your introduction.
No, that was fantastic. Thank you very much. And it's lovely to be with you here on the show today.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So we are going to be talking about business cases, referring to one of the articles that Elizabeth wrote. The link for that will be in the description. Um, but honestly speaking, there was a time when I would say my project's budget, schedule, and scope are much more important and daily consumable information for me as compared to, let's say, a business case document, right? That was because my job as a project manager was to deliver project on time, on budget, on quality, and I'm done. But in the
Yes.
last few years, value has replaced a lot of these attributes that I spoke of. Now, the job of a project manager is to ensure value delivery. And business case document is where you will find a lot of stuff around value that the project is aiming to deliver. And that is why this document becomes of utmost importance. Now, through the course of your project, it is possible that priorities shift, there's a change in the market situation, and the value to be delivered might change too. And that is why it becomes important to keep this document up to date. So let's discuss with Elizabeth how to do so. And she talks about 5 points which we should keep in mind while reviewing the business case. We will come to those five. But before we go there, Elizabeth, can you share the importance of this document and the importance of its review as well?
Well, the business case is everything, isn't it? It's the whole justification for why the project started in the first place. And I think you summed it up really well there, where you said life moves on, things change, strategic direction might change. And unless somebody is saying, let's just check, let's go back. What does this delay mean for our benefits? What does this addition to scope mean for our benefits? What does value look like now? Is it more, less? Is it still worth doing? And it's that sense check. So I think the business case is a really important document, but I think, like again, like you said, we often don't go back to it because once the project has started, our job is just, get the project over the line, complete the delivery,
Yeah.
and move on. But if we can every so often, maybe it's just a note in your calendar to remind you to talk to the sponsor about the business case, talk to the finance analyst about the benefits or the costs, so that we can just keep it in mind. Are we
Right.
still delivering value? Is this project actually going to do what we originally promised? And if it's not, do we continue with it or not? Which is ultimately the decision that we want to make.
Absolutely. So you might be on schedule, you might be on budget, but if the business case document itself is changing, then it's possible to sort of review the project again and take a call whether it's needed to continue with it or not. Now, let's talk about these 5 points that you have mentioned in the article. First one is strategic alignment. My
Mm.
question is, how often do you recommend reviewing? You also mentioned that it's not one of those documents that we might be looking at on a daily basis, right? But how often do you recommend reviewing a business case document, especially for strategic alignment, and that too for, let's say, long term projects?
Yes, I think it does depend on how long your project is, because if you're doing a project that lasts 6 months, you probably won't look at the business case at all.
Mm.
But the thing with let's say a 2 year or a 3 year project is that the organizational strategy may well change from 1 year to the next as you deliver on a longer term plan or 3 year goals or something like that. So I think it might be worth looking at it every 6 months, just briefly by yourself.
Mhm.
And that's just very arbitrary. But there could
Right.
also be a point where, for example, you get a new chief strategy officer, or you're going through a merger or an acquisition, or there's some kind of organizational thing that's happening that might prompt you to think, oh, what does that mean for the alignment of our strategy? This new project has come along and it's super important. So where does that leave my project? And how does this help us achieve our strategic goals? Because we've just had a new, financial report published, or some kind of new strategic presentation from the executive board
Absolutely.
around what the goals are. And that might make you think, let's just go back and check that this project's still in line with where the organization wants to go today.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you, like, if there were any specific red flags, so to say, which can indicate that I should go back to my business case document and review. But you, I think, mentioned it already. There's a change at, let's say, a CXO level. If there's a new financial report coming on, which might indicate. Is there anything else that, based on your practical experience, that you think is definitely a red flag, and it should basically result in you reviewing the business case?
I think if your sponsor changes, that's another one to consider.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say somebody resigns from the organization and a new senior manager is put in place and takes on the role of sponsor, or to be honest, any senior management change really in your stakeholders,
Right.
because that might change. They come with new ideas, don't they? They come with new priorities. Anything that your competitors are doing that your company, suddenly you're hearing in the corridors, oh goodness, have you seen what so and so's doing? Maybe we should be doing something similar. Anything like that. Market changes, economic
Right.
changes as well. So if your country suddenly hits a recession, that might mean that you don't need
Yeah.
to think through or at a bigger picture level. Do we still
Yeah.
have the funding to do this? Do we want to spend our money in this way?
Right.
And
Right.
all of these things are quite high level conversations, aren't they? Really, I mean, as a project manager, we're not going to be making the decision to cancel a project or to copy a competitor's strategy. But what we could be doing is having a conversation with our sponsor and the rest of the team to say, oh, I heard about this. Do you think that has an effect on what we're doing?
Yeah.
Is it worth us going back? Should we have a quick call, or let's take 10 minutes at the next team meeting and talk about what this means for us? And then
Yeah.
maybe something happens as a result of that conversation.
Absolutely. Love it. So, it's good that you talked about funding and the overall economics around project, because the next point was about affordability. And whenever we are talking about, let's say, shutting down a project, you have all this sunk costs that are related to it, right? So how can project managers navigate this challenge of sunk costs when assessing, let's say, the project affordability during your review that you're doing for the business case?
It's really hard, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
who wants to say, oh, we've just spent 3 million on this project and now we're going to throw it all away and stop. So it does take a level of organizational maturity to reflect on the fact that if the project is no longer viable, do we want to throw more money at it just
Right.
for the kudos of being able to say that we've finished? Or do we want to stop now, cut our losses, consider that it was a useful experiment, but it hasn't gone anywhere, and stop? And again, hard conversation for a project manager to have, but I think we can be impartial advisors to senior leaders and say, having looked at it, these are the ongoing costs. This is my resource forecast. This is our cost forecast for the next year, 18 months, however long. But we're not going to achieve our benefits. So we either have to accept that we're going to carry on, spend all of this money and all this time that could be spent on better, higher value projects,
Yeah.
or we have to accept that we're going to get lower benefits. And I think this is where portfolio management comes into play, and having a really strong PMO and the leadership in that area, where we don't get vanity projects onto the project pipeline in the first place. So hopefully we've got our senior executives and our stakeholders lined up to support the project because it's a sensible, smart thing to do, not because it's their precious baby that they really desperately want to get across the line at the expense of all others. So I'm not saying it's easy by all accounts, but the affordability of the project is definitely something worth considering. And you might find you have that conversation and it's going to cost more because you've added scope, or the project's been delayed, or you need extra contractors or whatever it is.
Right.
And that's fine. The organization says, yes, for whatever reason, it's important that we finish this project. But that affordability conversation is really worth having, because who's worked on a project where we haven't needed more resource or more money or more time,
Right.
or the scope hasn't changed at all. So
Love it.
whatever you put in a business case at the beginning is quite likely to be different once you're 6 months in.
Yeah, perfect, perfect. Love that answer. And yeah, I mean, I mean, when it comes to sunk cost itself, the concept of sunk cost is not to sort of look back at the amount that you have already spent and instead have a forward looking
Exactly.
view of the project. Great. So, riskiness or risk management, that is important too, which is your next point. And the article mentions portfolio risk. Now, can you elaborate on that? How project managers should consider the overall portfolio risk profile, right? We might not have the portfolio level view as well at sometimes. So
Yes, that's
when
true.
we, yeah, so when reviewing the riskiness of an individual project, how do we go about it?
Well, hopefully, as you know more about a project as you go through the work, the your awareness of risk means that some hopefully it's gone down. Hopefully your risk
Yeah.
profile has gone down because you're
Mhm.
solving problems and you're validating assumptions and things as you go. But perhaps you've uncovered something and it's made it more risky, who knows? But looking
Mhm.
at the risk profile that you put in the business case, someone would have made a decision based on do we do this project because how does this amount of risk sit with every other amount of risk that we've got within the organization? Because
Mm.
it would be
Love that.
a brave organization that took on like 10 really high risk, brand new, cutting edge technology type projects in a year,
Mhm.
instead of mixing up maybe a few innovative things and a few more things with lower risk that they had higher levels of confidence in.
Mhm.
So you may well find as the portfolio mix has changed, and your project risk has changed. Let's say suddenly you've become a lot less risky on your project.
Yeah.
That maybe that means that as a portfolio overall, the portfolio leaders can start more innovative projects because you've sort of freed up some of that available
Mhm.
risk appetite.
Mhm.
So, I mean, yes, as an individual project manager, we might not have that overall view, but what you can do is review the business case and say, look, we were high risk, now we're not. I'm going to
Mhm.
pass that information on to the portfolio team so that overall we can just make sure that the the organizational's reporting is reflecting everything. So it
Yeah.
might not have that much of an impact, but equally, if you've gone really risky and if
Mhm.
suddenly you've uncovered a whole set of problems that you didn't foresee coming, that might that information when you feed it up to the portfolio team might help them decide on what else should be taken on at any one time.
Yeah. I think this point itself pushes the project managers back to our initial point when we said that, it's no longer just about your own budget, your own schedule, your own scope. You're now looking at and considering portfolio level risks and having a view at the portfolio level as well. So yeah, love that point. The next point that you talked about was achievability. And
Mm.
let's say when facing challenges such as, let's say, resource shortages, or maybe any unexpected external factors, right? So how should project managers evaluate the achievability of their project plans?
What you're trying to do, and to be honest, you'll probably be doing this as you go through the project anyway, is
Hmm.
looking at can we still do this work? Can we achieve it? And in your
Mm,
weekly team meetings or your stand-ups, however you're managing the project day to day, you'll be having those conversations. And I suppose it links back to the business case by thinking through if suddenly we are struggling for resource or a supplier has gone bust, which happened on well, we chose not to use a supplier because they were in a financial situation that we didn't want to
mm,
get ourselves involved with.
yeah, yeah.
um, but I know if a technology supplier goes bust, that might well influence whether or not you can achieve your goals within the time frame and the budget that you had originally set yourself.
Mm,
So those are the kind of achievability things to take into account. And you're looking at that regularly. But going back to the business case and saying, we said we'd do this, and this was our baseline plan. And if we can't meet that now, if we're making these little changes, does that still mean that this project is viable? So, what
yeah.
does a
Mm,
6 month or 3 month delay mean to what we said we would achieve in that business case? And if you're in within tolerance or you've got some contingency money, then maybe it's not that big a deal.
maybe, yeah.
But if
Mhm.
if suddenly you're pushing out oh, okay, but a key resource has left and it's taken us 3 months to recruit somebody else with those same skills.
Hmm.
Suddenly you've got a big delay, and maybe that is going to affect the achievability of the
The project.
project within the framework that you said in the business case, even though you could probably still achieve it generally,
Hmm.
as long as it just take you 3 months longer, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
Does that
perfect.
answer the
So
question? I felt I waffled a bit there.
yeah, I think it answers the question. But one thing that I'd like to add here is I don't think there's any specific stage or any specific phase of a project when achievability might be under question. It could be very well in the beginning, it could be in the middle, it could be towards the end. We never know, right?
No, you never know. I'd like to think that the closer you get to the end, the more confident
Mhm.
you are that you can actually
Yeah.
do it.
Mhm.
But that's not to say that a big problem might not come out very towards the end.
Right. Agree. So finally, let's talk about benefits realization as well. Sometimes the project delays, they can push back the realization of benefits as well. It might be because of, let's say, you were supposed to deliver 5 features, now you're only doing 3 or whatever, right? Now, how can this pushback of the realization of benefits, right? How can project managers factor in any, let's say, schedule changes when evaluating the ongoing, the value proposition of a project, right? How do we do that? How do we factor the potential schedule changes, let's say?
Okay. Well, it starts with having an understanding of when your benefits start from.
Hmm.
So, um, by benefits, and especially as we talked at the beginning about value, most leaders will think of that in terms of money. So,
Hmm.
this particular benefit of a new feature will mean our customers can buy their product, and it means that we don't have to they can do online cancellations, and they don't have to ring
Yeah.
us to cancel their product, for example. So we
Hmm.
can save money on phone calls, and we can save money in our contact center because we don't need to have so many staff answering the phones for cancellations. I'm making this up, but let's say that whatever feature we're delivering, if you
Hmm.
think it through, you get to a point where there's a money related saving or an increase in revenue because we're selling more products, because now there's so
Yeah.
much better experience for people to buy the thing online.
Hmm.
So when we know when the feature is going live, we can say, okay, well, let's give it 3 to 4 weeks maybe, so that everybody understands that it's actually there and our customers start to use it. And then we'll start to see some amazing benefits, and we can start seeing that money trickle through.
Come in. Okay. Hmm.
And it might well be that if your project is delayed, so you have a schedule delay,
Hmm.
those benefits don't happen until later. So it's really important, I think, for us as project managers to work with our finance teams or whoever it is that has that understanding of what does that benefit look like in money terms, or maybe it's customer satisfaction. When are we starting to see customer
Hmm.
satisfaction
Yeah.
go up because we've
Hmm.
introduced new features? Whatever metrics you're using, when when do we get them? And maybe you have to wait until 3 months after the project, so it's somebody
Yeah.
else's problem to track it. But if it's starting to happen at some point during your longer project, and if you're doing iterative delivery, it's quite likely that that would happen.
Hmm.
um, then that's the measure that you need to look for, is when does it start? And if we slip our project schedule by a month, does that mean the benefits just slip by a month as well, and we get
Yeah.
less benefit in year because we've lost that month? Or does it have a
Hmm.
different kind of effect? Maybe it has no
Right.
effect, maybe it has 2 months worth of effect. Who knows?
Hmm.
But it depends very much on what your measures are. So I'd say when you're starting your project in your planning section and you're talking about what are our key success factors, what are our benefits, um, think through when are we likely to start seeing the impact of those, and then it'll be far easier to try and understand any schedule or budget implications on those.
Right, right. Essentially, I see this as yet another factor to consider when it comes to delays or changes in your project, right? We
Absolutely.
we used to think about just the cost, schedule, quality, budget. Now, what we are thinking about is benefits realization as well. Any change, if it takes longer for us to make a delivery, how does it impact the benefits realization? I mean, the benefits that we are essentially realizing from the project. Now,
Yes.
my last question to you will be about any emerging trends or any best practices that you see gaining traction when it comes to business cases and managing business cases or reviewing business cases.
Oh, that's really interesting. I What are my trends am I seeing with business cases? I think there's actually a bit of a trend towards not doing them, and I don't think that's a good thing. I think that the pace of business today means let's just get things done, let's just go as fast as we can. And sometimes, when I'm mentoring people, I'm working with teams or an individual who's in a team, and they've been told to do something, and the business case is a couple of slides on PowerPoint, or they've just been told by their executive. And I think we're under huge amounts of pressure to start delivery and execution and doing the doing without necessarily putting in enough work up front. And I imagine it's probably always been like that, but I feel like the business case is almost like an old-fashioned document now that we don't see so much, especially in teams that want to go fast, where you just start and then work it out as you go along. So that's pretty negative, isn't it? End on a negative point. Sorry.
That's okay.
One
That's
thing
okay.
I suppose is if you don't have a business case, and you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, where is my business case? Did I just get dumped on with my project? Then perhaps go back to your project sponsor and say, what's the justification for doing this? How are we tracking benefits? What's the original baseline? How do we come up with this idea? Who got involved? And ask all of those questions. You don't have to write a business case retrospectively, but it's useful to know that you're working on something that went through a thought process and that was valued.
Yeah, I mean, having a high level idea itself is good enough when you're working in environments where you're expected to churn out code every 2 weeks. So,
absolutely, yes.
Great. It was so good having you, Elizabeth. How can someone contact you if they want to?
Well, like you said, I blog at rebelsguidetopm.com. And from a mentoring perspective, you can find me at projectmanagementrebels.com, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Awesome. And some of those links will be available in the description as well. Thanks for taking the time out. I'm sure the community will find this podcast very helpful.
Thanks very much for having me. It's been great.